Welcome to Implicating the Real. My name is Michael. I'm joined by my good friend Joe. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing great.
And we're joined by our good friend Liana. Liana, how are you?
Great.
Good.
Happy to be here.
We should mention through the magic of podcasting, we're in the same chapter 7 in Seth Speaks, but there's been a long pause in between.
We've had a hiatus. We took a vacation.
If we're doing our jobs really well, it'll be seamless. We'll see.
Always good to, split in the middle of a chapter.
Yeah.
Is what I say.
Our voices probably sound like so much older, and
yeah, you guys don't even know who we are at this point.
We're not going to say how much time has passed. You guys got anything right off the bat? I think this very first sentence in session 531, not only are you part of other independent selves, each one focused in its own reality, but there's a sympathetic relationship that exists. Feels like it's a good overview of what's to come here, just kind of like defining this idea of the self.
Yeah, and I thought it was kind of interesting in relation to like the earlier part of the chapter, right, where we were talking about like you can split off portions of your self, sort of project them, but then sort of this is like the higher end side of it, right, where it's like you're also like there's these other ones that are like equally as like real or valid or whatever you want to say as yourself, that are sort of like running in parallel to each other. And it's sort of like about like what is the like experience of that happening, and how like in this chapter I feel like Seth talks a lot about like how you sort of ignore or you like don't notice all the information of that stuff happening,
Yeah, it's kind of a matter of focus, and like we focus on he uses the term like a small stream, and out of an available large stream, and then we just call that ourself.
Yeah,
I really love how, like a sentence later, he says you can draw upon knowledge that belongs to these other independent selves.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of like, I keep going back to the analogy of you play many video games, but each of your video game characters don't know each other. But any gamer would know that you draw skills that you learn in one game, you apply it to another. Like you might learn better situational awareness here and apply it to a different game. But it applies to like hobbies too, like something I might learn from knitting, I can apply it to like cooking or something like that.
Yeah. I like the video game analogy too, because to that character in one video game, intuitively they're like totally separate from this other one.
Yeah.
But to this, in the sense that like you're the higher self in that scenario, exactly, giving yourself to that character, and that part is totally connected.
Right.
Still.
Yeah. I feel like I thought it was really interesting. Seth used the phrase like stream of consciousnesses.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if that's just the next
in the middle
one.
of 91.
Yeah. The so-called stream of consciousness is simply that, one small stream of thoughts, images, and impressions that is part of a much deeper river of consciousness that represents your own far greater existence or experience. You spend all your time examining this one small stream, so you become hypnotized by its flow and entranced by its motion. Simultaneously, there are other streams of perception and consciousness that go by without your notice, yet they are very much a part of you, and they represent quite valid aspects, events, actions, and emotions with which you are also involved.
Yeah. A lot of this is more new to you than it is to us, but it is just for me, it's just trying to wrap my head around this idea of self and like finding ways that it makes sense. And one of the ways that this makes sense to me is like when you're waking up from like a really deep dream and you're reorienting to the self you are in waking life, you can kind of notice the process of like, you're going into like a completely different self in some sense, but it's so recognizable. It's never like, oh, this isn't me, this isn't right. I mean, I think as a child, maybe I've had a few dreams that were like so good that I was like upset to be back in my body maybe. But like, I don't think I've ever had the experience where like, this isn't me. Like,
but have you had those dreams where you wake up and like for the first 10 seconds, you're like, wait a minute, who am I? What year is it? Like, what am I doing? What point am I in my life? Like, what age am I?
Yeah. Sometimes I'm like, just like, it takes me, that's kind of trippy when it takes you a second to like, where the hell am I?
I feel like I get it a lot when I wake up and it's like, like twilight or like in the morning, and you're like, did I sleep like 36 hours? Like how, like what day is it? Like.
That reminds me, I had a coworker that like, it was in the wintertime, so it was dark. He showed up to work at like 6 p.m. thinking it was 6 a.m.
Oh my God.
And the people working on his unit decided, like, they just kind of like all winked at each other and like, let's play along with this for a while. So like they made him go get like the breakfast cart and stuff and like try to make him do all these things until he figured it out.
That would be such a trip. Oh my God.
Yeah, it was funny.
But I guess like the thing that I wanted to bring up with this like stream of consciousness thing is like, do you guys think this is sort of like stream of consciousness, like in the same sense of like, you know, people do like stream of consciousness writing or whatever, you know, or like where like the stream of consciousness is like the very specific like part of your mind that's like, I'm doing this and then I'm doing this and then I'm doing this, right? And like, I think most people would say like they've sort of gotten this idea from psychology, just like from the culture, that it's like, that's not even most of what your mind is, right? Like most of what's going on in your mind, like people think of like the iceberg, right? Where there's like the big subconscious under it. Like, is Seth talking about stream of consciousness as just that little like tip part? Or are we sort of calling the whole like individual psyche this like stream?
I think he is just referring to the experiential part of the stream of consciousness more than like referring it to like any sort of like pedagogical or like teaching of psychology, you know, like even though psychology is like defining the self in this way, I think experientially we're kind of in this mode where so like we recognize ourselves as like everything that's immediate. I don't know.
Yeah, that's like the blinders. Like later on we'll talk about like
Yeah.
blinders on the ego.
Yeah.
Because like my thought is that makes an interesting interpretation where like a lot of like your internal emotions or like internal drives then are getting defined here as a different dimension of existence. Like some of your really deep emotional sort of like reactions that you have to things aren't stream of consciousness, you know? They're not like things that you are just like perceiving to happen. They're sort of like this underlying like pattern of stuff. And it's like, if that is what we're calling like another dimension or another aspect of, you know, the world, then I think it's a lot easier for people to think like, oh, like this other dimension of reality is like very accessible. Like it's not like this other plane of existence. It's just like this stuff that I'm already experiencing, you know?
I think that hints at the direction you need to go to, but I think there is like depths that there's the accessibility, but it's just progressively, I don't want to say less accessible, but like, you know, there's further depths. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like that, but even more so.
Yeah. I think like even experiencing something comes from a deep place, depending on the person probably. Like you might not recognize that coming from a deep place. That's just becomes part of the stream once it, you know, becomes some sort of event or action, right?
Yeah.
But our, you know, like our own psychology isn't a good example of like trying to go deeper into this definition of the self. Seth just has his own version of it, I guess, right?
All right.
Be interesting to read the history of, you know, how we thought about the self and stuff before, you know, like Freud and those people came along and redefined it.
Yeah, because you have to assume that a lot of, or I presume that many, many cultures, right, had like sort of their own take on the other side of the coin. You know, like there's like the present, you know, self, but then there's perhaps like a hidden self. And it's like kind of interesting to like look in like just like the Western, you know, tradition, like how little of that is sometimes like acknowledged by like very smart people.
Yeah.
Like if you go back and read like Enlightenment thinkers and like their theory of mind, they're sort of weirdly operating on this assumption that like for something to even be in your mind at all, you have to be actively thinking about it. And like that assumption is sort of just like left unproblematic a lot of the time.
They don't like question, where does it come from or how does it?
Yeah. And like to a modern reader, it's just like incredibly jarring.
Yeah.
That it's like just so obvious. Like, well, like that couldn't work that way, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
how would you walk unless you were consciously thinking of walking?
Right, exactly. Like there's so many just like easy daily counterexamples that just like never, you know, get brought up. It's very strange.
All those kinds of things, like I've thought of this often with like, you know, in terms of wokeness. Like I always like to ask like, okay, so what is the thing that we're not seeing now that's going to be completely obvious in 10 or 15 years?
Oh, unfortunately, I feel like we're almost at the age where we're already blind
Got
to
it
it.
wrapped up? Oh, I thought you were going to say we got it all covered.
Oh no, it's just if there are young people in the audience, they're probably like,
Oh,
oh yeah, there's this thing and you guys don't know about.
Oh,
no, but I mean, as a society, like, I get it. Like, yeah, we're going to be, at a certain point, age seems to be a factor there. But, well, and Seth says this too, that like young people come into the world to bring in, not primarily, but often will bring in new ideas that the world needs. To me, that was easy to see, going through like the last 10 years, having been familiar with this concept.
I think about that a lot, especially in medicine, where I'm like, man, this stuff is so messed up. In 50 years, we're going to look back and think about how barbaric it is that we don't allow assisted suicide or like dying with dignity.
Right.
And I'm just like, this is so obvious.
Yeah.
I'm going to look back and think, damn,
We have
2024 medicine was barbaric as hell.
yeah, we have all these fights about like, my body, my rights, like when it's abortion or it's vaccines, but like not with your life, you don't get to decide.
Yeah. And like you were talking about too, like how it's very obvious for like a lot of people nowadays that like how gender like interacts with like, your personality and how there's like a lot of these like different like sort of complex like aspects and like facets to it. And how like if you're reading like Sethian material, it's like, okay, like this makes a lot of sense. Like this clearly like is something that could just be a result of you like really thinking and deeply and like, ascending sort of your like conscious level of understanding like how the soul works. But it's like that didn't get introduced into society in like a mainstream way until like a certain or period of time where people had to like kind of make it a publicly knowledgeable thing,
It's very interesting how, like as a society, we're like hypnotized into a certain way of thinking or being blind to certain things. And then it is, like I'm saying, like, with the advance of time or looking back, it's much more obvious in hindsight. It's like, I'm always shocked because I remember like, 10, 15 years ago watching a movie thinking like, oh, this is like the peak of quality in all these different ways. Like comparing it to something from 10, 15 years before that. And then the same thing just keeps happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's part of the fun, though, knowing that
Definitely.
Like, you have all these different, like every decade has its own flavor.
Yeah.
And I think it's really fun to think about how we get to pick what decade to incarnate into since all time is simultaneous. I think that's part of the that's part of the game to like incarnate into a specific decade and face that challenge of whatever backwards thinking you had during that time.
Yeah, and just in terms of like, I brought up movies, but like he gets into like arts on the next page, but like some of the things that do hold up through time are all the more impressive because like everything around it from that time is like faded or it has this kind of like obviously aged flavor. But like there's like works of art that are like, oh, they made this in the 60s and it still holds up. That's amazing. And I think from Seth's perspective, he's kind of claiming they just like reached way deeper into like other realms of consciousness when they created that.
Yeah, it's almost like there's like some more universal truth that's getting like expressed through art that like really, really lasts, like the things that we consider to be like great, like works of like creative genius.
Yeah.
Is just like you had to really plumb down into something that like transcends, your time period.
I think some of the coolest examples are the ones that somebody made something and it's completely unrecognized in their time. Like it's time has to catch up to it. It's so far ahead of its time.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Jumping back off of these streams of consciousness, I got that next paragraph. These other streams of consciousness, however, are connected with other self forms that you do not perceive. But the body, in other words, is simply one manifestation of what you are in one reality. But in these other realities, you have other forms. I mean, that hints at like some of the difficulty in recognizing this, but that's kind of what I was saying about like recognizing that feeling of waking up and not having the experience like, this isn't me. You know what I mean? Even though you're like moving into like a totally different focus, at least in my experience, that sense of like, oh, this is me. You're just waking up to another part of yourself.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a lot longer than other times.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've drove all the way to work and I'm sitting in the office, and then all of a sudden you go like, oh yeah, I'm a person, I'm alive, you know, like.
That's funny.
But so I was thinking when I was reading this, like, to me, it seems like there's all of this like plurality of like your own individual self, but like trying to imagine like what experiencing all of that is. To me, I had this weird concern where it feels to me almost like it would be kind of like lonely to have like all these internal dimensions, you know?
Like it's just so much that it kind of whitewashes any like individual experience.
Well, I guess not really, because I assume that you have like so much more like ability and like capacity to experience all the things when you're like at that level. I guess my concern was more like, does Seth talk like later about like how like when people are, or like when entities are in these other like dimensions, how they like communicate with one another as individuals? Because it seems all like very like self-contained, you know?
He does. He hints at it at the quote that you read, where he says you can dip deeper into these other dimensions, and he'll eventually say it's much more easy than most people think.
Okay.
What stops you generally is your belief that they don't exist or that you can't do that.
I think he's maybe in this book he's already talked about how like entities like their thoughts are basically open to each other. I still think it takes like some form of like presence or focus. It's hard to conceptualize like, you know, the timelessness or spacelessness or however you want to put it, but like, you know, like all these entities are having all these experiences. I think there's still focus involved, right? If we're three entities sitting in this room, you know, room in quotes, then, you know, we're probably totally aware of each other's thoughts. I think that's what he's referenced. But like if our focus is elsewhere, we're not necessarily focused on each other's thoughts, but we could tune into it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he talks about like a lot for our level of learning to develop a mobility of consciousness. And it just sounds like at the entity level that's like, you know, superpower relatively.
Yeah.
He also says at one point, I don't know if I'll be able to pull it up in time, but Seth basically says like there are no secrets. You may think that you have secrets, but everyone on some level is aware. And I've noticed that too. Like the deeper I get into the Seth material, especially with my friends who also know the Seth material, I can ask them like, hey, have you been feeling really crappy about yourself lately? Have you been like doubting your skills in this one area? Because I can pick up on it. Like I'll be having certain thoughts, or it'll be reflecting in like subtle behaviors that they're doing, and it'll be like, yeah, I have been. You know, when you really learn that physical life is a reflection of what's going on in your mental actions, you can start to see other people's their events, their behaviors, everything reflects what's going on inside. So it's sort of like a window into something. I mean, it feels like you're not supposed to be seeing, but I'm guessing if you're well-intentioned, it's not a problem. You know, obviously don't use it against people, but he does say like thought transmission happens all the time. It's just most of us are closed off to it. Most of us will deny intuitive feelings. But I've had it to the point where my friends will know when I'm sad. They'll be out doing stuff, like riding in a car with their friends, and like something will happen to me, or I'll get like a phone call or something. And they'll ask me later, like, hey, at this time, did something happen? I'll say yes, because we're so close now, and we've all read the Seth material, so we know that this is possible. And just the knowing that it's possible has removed that limiting belief that it wasn't possible. So this tends to happen like more and more. Have you noticed this, Michael?
Yeah, I was gonna bring this up, so this is right where I'm at with this. But like, I think before we open up to these sorts of possibilities, we have other ways of explaining the phenomenon. You know, it's like, oh, the person's really intuitive or perceptive or sensitive, you know, which you could use those same words applying to these beliefs, but like this just opens it up to like what potentially is literally happening. And I think it is true. Just a lot of what he's saying here is just like opening ourselves up to these different beliefs allow us to really see them when they're there, like the phenomenon that he's talking about.
Okay, cool. I mean, that is reassuring that there's like a phenomenal difference, you know? Because like otherwise it seems like you could take it in a very like a self-focused, like self-centered point of view where you're like just reaffirming your own like thoughts and like intrusive thoughts, right? Because it seems sort of like there's a part where Seth talks about like, oh, this like manifests as like little like, you know, words or like little phrases that might like pop into your brain. And it's like, I feel like there'd be sort of a trap of somebody getting too focused on like what's going on with just their own individual perception of stuff. But if it also just comes along with sort of like this like greater just sense of other people's, like internal, world, then that does seem like it would, be less of a closing off like to the rest of the world,
Yeah, because he is saying that the only thing that's preventing us from accessing this is kind of our own willingness and ability to do it, or maybe the willingness more than the ability. I'm thinking too of like maybe it's at the extreme materialistic end. There's like a whole field where they point to these like micro expressions on the face, that's how we know so much about each other. Like that's how we know our life. And there's like something to it, but like I think that's like kind of the extreme, like how do we really know this? Like what physical phenomena are happening here? Because they're, from that point of view, they're not letting in, the possibility of telepathy or anything like that.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Of course, that doesn't account for when something telepathic seems to happen when people can't see each other. Like if
a
relative or someone you haven't spoken to who lives 1,000 miles from you.
Yeah.
You guys haven't talked in 3 months, but they know what's going on. Like that's not explained by micro expressions.
I feel like, the people that are going down that road aren't even open to that being a possibility probably, right?
Right.
Yeah. Although, I don't know how much you guys know about the studies that our government did on remote viewing, where they showed that it was statistically significant, but there's... it's remote.
Like, it was like during the Cold War.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were having remote...
Funny, like, how open-minded the government can be when it comes to, like, we have to beat the Russians.
They were just desperate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they find something and then they just like do nothing with it. Or who knows, maybe someday we'll find out.
That the information they got was too vague for them to use, but like now most of that is declassified, so it's like, yeah, but we can't really use it and now we have satellites, so
I guess, maybe technology surpassed it.
They figured out just having like a good enough camera floating over Russia was like good enough to find silos and shit.
I don't know. I think eventually, you might be better off spying, the organic way or the mental way.
It might be one of those things in 80 years when they declassify more stuff
Oh,
that we're like, oh, this is why they just suddenly seem to drop it. It's because they didn't actually drop it and got really advanced, but they just didn't want to tell anyone.
double top secret.
Yeah.
They're like, we got to put out some fake documents so no one else in other governments tries this,
Yeah, we looked into it and it only goes far. It's not really helpful.
Definitely a dead end.
Don't even.
Nothing to see here. Like, does that answer your question though about like the loneliness?
No, yeah, that does, yeah. Because the concern I had was sort of like, if you are having, from your perspective, these like internal experiences and you're like, oh, this is just like part of the plurality that is myself, right? One of the nice things about physical reality is that you can't help but bump into other people a lot of the time. Like they will intrude upon your reality, whether you want them to or not, it seems like. You can be like, oh, I'm just like in my feelings. I need to go for like a walk, and just like be all moody. But then sometimes you just like walk into the park and there's like a dude there with his dog, right? And you're like, man, I'd really like to be alone, but there's just a dude here with his dog. Like, I can't help that. But like the fact that you can't help that helps you confirm that that is truly like another being, Like the fact that you're not like controlling their actions and they can intrude on you. But the problem with being like, okay, in this like spiritual, emotional dimension, anything that's like coming into my mind might just be another aspect of myself. Is that then it becomes difficult to be like, is there anything besides myself,
I know exactly.
Oh,
I feel like everyone who ever discovers manifestation encounters that solipsism question of, oh shit, am I the only sentient thing in the world? If everything is just a reflection, does other exist? And it gets really lonely. I think Seth is like one of the biggest source teachers I have found who have said like, yes, there are other people. Don't panic. It's fine. You do control your reality, but that doesn't mean that the other people are just like NPCs, essentially. Like they are valid, they are sentient and real.
Yeah, and you can go have chats with them. It's like totally fine.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I think the solipsism question can always be answered. Like you can always go all the way to the top if there is like a top or, and say, oh, all that is must be lonely because it's all that is. But I don't think that's how you experience it. Like, I just think of like identity differently. I don't know. Do you have that experience of like loneliness, or like, are you saying that this like encountering someone at the park just kind of like disproves that could be a possibility.
Well, I don't know. I suppose like I really enjoy the experience of being a human being.
Yeah.
And like I think part of human experience is like loneliness and the satiation of like loneliness. Like loneliness and then the idea of like overcoming loneliness, right? Is like big to like the experience of what it means to like be a human being.
I think that's really true. And I think Seth talks about that in the sense where we've touched on this, but like the 3 creative dilemmas. But like I think the depth of experience of loneliness might be particularly a human experience, because in this dimension, according to Seth, we as egos have like cut ourselves off in this extreme way that doesn't usually happen in other versions. Like the ego is this part of the self that tries to do this impossible thing, tries to cut itself off and, you know, kind of believe it's its own thing and disconnected from everything when it's not. Which I feel like would lend itself to like probably the depths of loneliness that would be hard to experience in other ways.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
This reminds me of that viewpoint that what if we are just God experiencing ourselves and we made ourselves forget so that we could have the illusion of...
I feel like that'd be the saddest result though, you know?
Would it be? Because you can do this. You have a workable solution.
I think there's an asterisk to it. I think that makes it more palatable, or completely palatable to me, is like, and I got this from Seth, that like we're not just like forgetting. We are forgetting in a sense. We're like cutting ourselves off. We're going down to this smaller stream of experience. But by doing that and by embodying that experience, we're growing out of that limitation, right? So it's not just there's just one thing. Everything is known, and we just have to like go back and forth in this process of forgetting and remembering, and it's just all the same uniform thing. It's just like every forgetting creates a new context out of which like that limited part of the self grows anew. Seth says infinity is growing, which is really hard to wrap your mind around.
Yeah. I mean, even if it's progressive, though, like the problem with it being one thing at the end of the day, or it being one like person, right, is like the other side of it is like there's the loneliness, but then there's like the connection that's like the beautiful thing about it. And like part of what's required for that connection, I think, is that the other is truly an other. Like it's not an aspect. It's like truly that's a completely separate entity from you, you know? Like there's something to that that's sort of like required for it to be the experience that you want it to be. So like to find out that at the end of the day it was just you on the other side too makes it almost, it like cheapens it. It like makes it not the same kind of experience, you know? It's like if you saw a kid like, you know, sitting in a room alone and they would like walk to one side of the room and say something and walk to the other side of the room and say something. It's like you'd feel bad for them because you'd be like, man, I wish there was another kid you could talk to, kind of thing.
Sometimes I wonder if that's just due to our beliefs, though, as humans, because I'll watch, like, animal documentaries, and some of these animals live ridiculously lonely lives, like, completely in solitude, especially, like, male mammals, and I'm just like, is this hell for them? But I don't think it would, like, I don't think Seth would say that. I think Seth says we all pick our lives. If you choose to incarnate as a dog, you do that.
To all the male mammals in the audience, I see you. You are visible. I see you. I understand.
I mean, you just kind of hinted that you enjoy like a certain flavor of loneliness, right? Like I feel like it's a part of a complete palette of experience that I'm looking for in this life. So in that sense, I am like not quick to dismiss that idea that I've like chosen everything, even when there's pain. But that's the tougher question to ask, and especially when someone else is asking it. I'm not going to sit there and tell someone that like, oh yeah, you chose this pain and it's all your fault and blah, blah, blah. It's like, for some people, they're not in a place to like, they're not ready to hear that message.
Definitely.
Yeah, because that's kind of what like isolation does functionally do something for you, you know? Like it allows you to sort of like self-motivate. It allows you to initiate your own like growth, you know? But
you're kind of saying like, if what you're coming back to is always your own self on some level, then that makes it less satisfying.
I mean, I think you were right that like there's some animals that could be satisfying for, you know?
And there's some people who are like that too, who want to live in a cabin out in the woods miles away from others.
I suppose there are people like that. I was about to say, like, I think humans just aren't like that, but there are people who do that, you know?
And like my thinking is, who's to say? Because you're projecting your human beliefs onto, let's just say, God or all that is, and thinking, okay, if I get lonely, then he must. But then who's to say that that hermit in the woods isn't thinking, if I'm like that, then God is like that. Then God truly doesn't want just me.
Yeah, right.
I think God's lonely for more experience, but like in the sense that Seth is saying, like infinity is always growing. It's always fulfilling that too. Or also think of like our own idealization of the opposite of loneliness is like meeting a soulmate. You know, I have this kind of naive romantic work friend that every time he has a crush on someone, he's like, it's like we're twin flames. You know, he says that. And it's like, that to me is like the opposite of loneliness, but it is kind of, they're like hinting at that they're like, we're connected so much that it is another version of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they can't acknowledge the other person as truly their own person because they had to have been put in existence specifically to meet you if they're your soulmate, you know, which denies their agency or their individuality.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of one of the challenges of understanding Seth's idea of the self is that like there's these different focuses, but they're separate, but they're the same, you know, like our mind doesn't want to hold the contradiction together.
People like your work friend, and like when you were mentioning, I was just thinking about this in general. It was what I was trying to say to you, Joe, about like how much of what we want is driven by human limiting beliefs. Your coworker, why does he want romance? What is the deeper fundamental reason behind what he wants? That he needs like, why do we want to not be lonely? Is it because we need validation? Is it because we need a fun partner? Is it because we feel like we need someone else to give us ideas? I feel like it is possible to have a very fulfilling life without feeling lonely, but that would necessitate that your belief system aligns with it. Which is why I feel like it's not like we're getting back into primary. Like, that's why I feel like wanting other things is not a primary reality. I think it's really hard we don't have a control group, essentially. We can't necessarily say like, oh, it is possible for a human consciousness to not want someone else. Because on planet Earth, where would you find someone who has not been tainted, for lack of a better word, with the belief that, oh, you need validation from others? I mean, society literally raises us to live in a society. Like, we're trained to get along with others, so we seek others' approval, you know? Then there's that whole like, let me figure out how to say this. There's that whole rejection feels really bad because back in the day, because we evolved to take really seriously rejection, because back in the day, if we were ejected from a tribe, it was a death sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But how much of that is like nature versus nurture?
it's a tough question. I usually assume that humans are like, maybe not uniquely, but specifically social in like even the context of other like animals or like mammals or whatever, just because like they do like that psychology studies on like people who get raised outside of like a lot of like social interaction.
Yeah.
And it's like you can test and it's like some of your like cognitive functions just like never fully develop.
For sure.
You know? And it's like there's the question of whether that's like, unfortunately, a lot of the people that are raised that way are also raised in like incredibly abusive situations.
Yes.
So it's like, is a lot of that from like the parental like thing, or is it because of this specifically this denial of like social interaction? You know, like if you don't develop a language by like a certain time, like a language, like at least one like widely communicated human language, like the whole concept of language becomes like really hard. And like as long as you have one language, you can learn other languages, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like there's something about being able to communicate with other human beings that like needs to get wired into your brain for you to sort of like function as like a social entity with other human beings, you know?
Right, but that just makes you wonder how many other skills would be like that also. Who's to say that if we were to raise those children with robots, it'd be a really unethical experiment, raise these children with robots, no human interaction, they might develop other skills we don't even consider skills today, like extreme self-reliance, really good independence, being able to problem solve by themselves. Or like, if we were to raise kids and force them to play an instrument at a young age or conquer math at a young age, who's to say that they wouldn't become musical geniuses or STEM geniuses? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, new language is something that we need, which in this society we do. But 3,000 years from now, when AI takes over,
right, everyone.
what would we?
like everyone will just be able to actually like, you know, do the empathic like communication thing,
Yeah.
right? And we won't have to like use our mouths. Like how archaic.
Yeah,
It's really interesting because, yeah, in this life, there's like development stages that have to be met to like get to certain levels with just skills of interacting, right? But you can see, like, to your point, like, if your energy is going somewhere else, if that development is focused in another direction, you could actually be like a genius in a certain field. But can you relate it back to the rest of the world? And like, I really struggle with that, like early days as an artist or just like writing and like, am I writing because I want to, or do I want to give it to the world? Like to what extent is like the theoretical audience part of my own motivation? And I think it's always a part for sure. And yeah, it's a big question. Like, to what extent are we here to purposely interact with other people? And you brought this up, you know, in the beginning, just with like, you can't even walk to the park without encountering somebody. Like, this is a field of limitation. I think it is, you know, time and space are limited. It forces us to deal with certain situations that we would otherwise have the option not to. Like, I have to have a relationship with my neighbor because I don't have the option of like living far enough away from him that I don't have to deal with him. But like, I think on a more moral or spiritual level, like that gives me these challenges that I am seeking. I'm seeking a certain development in this life and challenges. And, you know, like our entire social contract is, you know, all of our politics, I think, stem around this core idea of like, how do we maximize each other's freedoms without letting those freedoms trample on the next person's freedoms? How do we balance that? And it's just a constant juggling act.
Yeah, because the limitations are such that like you can't, not everyone can have everything they want.
My freedom to sing bothers someone else's freedom to like have silence, you know? Like these are just small examples of things we have to negotiate with like throughout this entire life.
Interestingly, I think with remote work, that's changing a lot.
Yeah.
Now, like, people are vacating out of cities.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can live like a goblin in your house if you want to, and none of your coworkers have to know.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's still someone in the like camper next door to you, you know, like there's still different versions of the same thing happening.
But when Starlink comes out, you could just be in the middle of nowhere in Alaska and
That's true.
You can get all your groceries delivered to your doorstep. You don't even have to go out and say hi to the person.
yeah.
Yeah. You just have all your interaction just trolling online.
Very healthy.
I wanted to read this quote on 92 about art. Any creative work involves you in a cooperative process in which you learn to dip into these other streams of consciousness and come up with a perception that has far more dimensions than one arising from the one narrow, usual stream of consciousness that you know. Great creativity is then multidimensional for this reason. Its origin is not from one reality, but from many, and it is tinged with the duplicity of that origin. Great creativity always seems greater than its pure physical dimension in reality. By contrast with so-called usual, it appears almost as an intrusion. It takes the breath away. Such creativity automatically reminds each man of his own multidimensional reality. The words "know thyself" therefore mean far more than most people ever suppose. Seth is always hinting at this idea that creativity is really reaching through dimensions, and I always am very attracted to this idea.
I think artists know this very well because where their greatest ideas come from. Like, I think I was reading a thread on some Seth forum somewhere once where people were talking about hit songs that when you look into it, the artist was like, oh yeah, I just completely out of nowhere. I just sat down in a studio one day and it's almost like the words just came to me. They didn't feel like they consciously wrote it. It just came out very much like these books that Jane wrote.
Right.
Yeah. And especially like how we were talking about earlier with like looking back in hindsight in decades, you can see like this song still hits and it's like, oh, they definitely pulled something out of somewhere that just like it's timeless in a way, or maybe not timeless, but relatively more timeless than every other song they were making.
Right.
If they're like a one-hit wonder.
Yeah. And then he eventually, I don't know if we've had Jane meet Richard Bach, the author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull?
In this book, I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Slight spoilers, but that book was written also like this, and the author specifically sought out Jane when he found out that Jane channeled this book, because he was like, oh, Jonathan Livingston Seagull came to me in the same way, and I feel like I didn't write it because he just sat down and the words just came.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think he was facing a bit of imposter syndrome, and then Seth had to comfort him and basically be like, no, it is your work, because all data that comes through your consciousness is inevitably like affected by your consciousness in some way. Like, you have touched it in a way that only you could, and you've changed it slightly. So it is your work in that regard. And when I was doing the Seth Dreams course by Robert Wagner, there was a woman who was a student who said that after doing like Seth's exercises to unlock your creative potential and like reach into this creative fount, she had that happen, where one day she woke up and she was just like, I just had this entire book in my head. I don't know where it came from. All I had to do was sit down and write it. So she was telling us that like just 2 hours a night, she would just sit down and just type it out. Just like how Jane wrote that.
That's crazy.
It is crazy.
I think if like the Seth material didn't even exist, like there would be tons of examples in this world, and I think almost every creative person has had like a some level of it, even if it's a very small version of it.
And it's fun to think of like a probable reality where the Seth material or just the concepts in the Seth material are taught in schools, where children are encouraged to just allow their creativity to flow from some inner space, where they're not told like, oh yeah, everything comes out of the mind, it's all intellectual and like cause and effect based. It's interesting to see, to wonder like what kind of art, movies, stories would come out of children like that, out of that world.
Yeah, they would just like kind of go around like fishing for like transcendental like concepts, you know? They'd be like, no, like the book will come, like,
yes,
you know?
Yes. And because expectations create reality.
And then it would, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting in light of what we were just saying about like this anxiety about like meeting other people and them either being or not being other parts of ourselves. With the same thing with like creative work. I created this. Is it coming from me specifically, or am I just getting it from somewhere else?
I swear I've heard, like, I have this idea bouncing around in my head, but I don't usually like to say things unless I can 100% confidently attribute it to Seth. But I swear that he said at some point that all art and all invention just comes from, like the 4D. What does he call it? Do you know what I'm talking about? Where he's Framework 2.
Framework 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That none of it is from us. It just all comes from Framework 2.
Yeah, but I mean, even saying that, it sounds like, oh, it's just this other thing and all we can do is pluck it out of there. But he's saying to, this author, that like it takes you to like tune into that. Like there's some agency there. There's some like accomplishment there, and it shouldn't be disregarded.
Reminder for the listener, what's Framework 2?
Jesus, this is one of the hardest things for me to define.
Well, I think the way I always look at it, he says that it's kind of like the complete fabric of probabilities, that this is Framework 1. He's just using these terms arbitrarily just to give us terms to hang on to. But like Framework 2, I think it's like the complete fabric of probabilities, and we can just pluck from it, basically. Like he'll say like, oh, my novel is already written in Framework 2. I just have to access it.
Right.
And that's kind of exactly what we're talking about here.
It's like the multiverse. It's like every potential existence exists in Framework 2. The only thing that doesn't exist in Framework 2 is things that necessarily do not exist.
Right.
Right.
But then, like it quickly goes much farther beyond our conceptions or our ability to imagine from there, because then there's a relative Framework 3 that's kind of the same relationship to Framework 2.
So impossible things exist in Framework 3?
Impossible for us to like wrap our minds around, probably.
Square circles, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just lonely gods. I don't know.
It's a loneliness. It's like it's the sandwich strategy. You got loneliness on the bottom. You get Framework 2, where everyone's just a party, and then you get loneliness on the top.
Yeah, a little variety. Well, and that was always one of my like personal philosophical questions is like, do we need deprivation and pain to really appreciate the pleasure? And I don't know if you do, but I think it does change the experience. Like, people sometimes kind of roll their eyes at me when I say this, but like one of like the most pleasurable experiences of my life was like just drinking water at the drinking fountain after like a 3-hour wrestling practice. Just like so dead and dehydrated and tired, and like it was just amazing. It's like, yeah, it's all relative.
Yeah,
I agree. I don't think it's necessary, because Seth does say that some, like he says, we're all gods in training, but some gods in training choose not to come into physical reality. But that Seth speaks about his reincarnational lives, including that one where he was like a single destitute mother of like 12 kids or something, and how that really made him appreciate just the simplicity of waking up in the morning and all your kids are still alive and having a piece of bread to eat and not dying.
Yeah, he says something like, yeah, like a crust of bread was more pleasurable than any cake I ever had in any other life, or something like that. Or
exactly.
Yeah, I feel like that. I mean, there's a parallel there to what people do just in their normal everyday lives, right?
Yeah, people play with that concept.
Yeah.
Like maybe one of the most normal basic versions is just like no spoilers. Like you're depriving yourself of the knowledge of something that's completely controlled, but like it helps, like, and you're a weird example, like you don't care about spoilers, but
oh yeah, we've never talked about this. All right, to me, artistically, you can enjoy like a movie or a novel or whatever equally well whether or not you know what's going to happen.
I agree.
Yeah, it's all about like watching the artistry play out, and knowing that it's going to happen almost lets you appreciate it more, because you're able to be like, now I get to like really witness the nitty gritty of like, how are they going to do this thing?
And the foreshadowing, you pick up on it. It's just like it's its own experience, just as valid as not spoilering.
But I'm not disputing that, but I'm just saying on top of that, there can be another level of pleasure by being completely surprised. And a lot of times the artists themselves, they choose to show you the ending at the beginning. So then you are put in that place where like, oh, the artistry here is them showing me how they're getting there, how they're pulling it off and justifying it.
Yeah, the record scratch.
Yeah.
But you're wondering how I got here.
Yeah, it's kind of a flex. That's our show, but fear not, the never-ending conversation continues next week. If you're enjoying the show, please be so kind as to subscribe, like, rate, and review, and if you're feeling frisky, tell a friend. Contact us at implicatingthereal@gmail.com. You can support the show at patreon.com/implicatingthereal. We are doing our best, but whatever support you can lend helps us appreciably. We are not affiliated with the publishers or proprietors, but we encourage you to get the books. You can follow along as we endeavor to dive deep into the Sethian worldview, and there's really nothing like cultivating your own relationship with the material. Until next week, we wish you a fun good evening.